Sorry I didn't get round to the Caradron Overlords yesterday, things got a little bit manic, but we are back today and the focus is the Disciples of Tzeentch. I will get round to the Overlords just when I get a little bit more time. I wanted to get back on track and not fall further behind with the faction focuses, so we are going to be doing the Disciples now today. And again, this is a faction I know very, very little about. So let's just dive right in, have a look at their rules, their battle traits, and their war scrolls, and see what has changed. The battle traits still seem to revolve around controlling destiny and manipulating the battlefield, and that comes in the form of their Masters of Destiny rule, which grants you in your deployment phase the ability to roll 9 dice, and these are your destiny dice, and you can choose to swap out a roll for a specific set of actions for one of your destiny dice. So you can swap out a casting, a charge, a run, a hit, a wound, a save, an unbinding roll. You can't use them to replace rerolls. You have to decide you're going to use one before, and then any destiny dice you use replace the roll. But it is a really strong ability for getting the result that you need. And what it means is if you need to make a 6 for something and you've got a 6 in your destiny dice pool, you can just swap it out for that and know you are going to be getting it. What is notable about these is that they do apparently count as unmodified rolls, so they can, at least from my understanding, proc certain effects as well, like the auto wounds on 6s to hit, for instance. So it is a very, very powerful mechanic. As we saw with Eldari at the beginning of 10th edition in 40k, that extra reliability and being able to proc the result you want is incredibly powerful and can sometimes run the risk of being a bit broken too. Although I will say on the face of it, I think this is less potent than the Eldari Fate dice, purely because there aren't things like 2d6 mortal wound Wraith Knight combos that you can do quite so easily in AOS compared to 40k. But still, I think it's a very cool, very thematic, very strong battle trait, and it is, if nothing else, going to give you a huge amount of confidence in knowing what results you can get, what you are going to be shooting for, and knowing that if you are putting this many attacks into this unit, you should be able to at least do this much damage and kind of get that reliability in your output, whether you are charging or shooting or fighting or just trying to make saving throws. On top of that, there are a few other parts of the battle traits. Once per turn in any shooting phase, you can enact your Conflagration of Tzeentch. This allows you to pick an enemy unit that has had damage allocated to it by a Word Flame spell or a Word Flame shooting ability, and they get the Burning keyword. This is a new keyword which impacts quite a few things in the new Tzeentch weapons and profiles and abilities, and it ties in with the next battle trait, which is Burning Word Flame, which is again once per turn at the end of any turn, and you roll a d3 for each burning enemy unit, and on a 2 or a 3 on the d3, they take that much mortal damage. On a 1 on the d3, they lose the burning keyword, but they do quite reliably take a little bit of extra chip damage over the course of the game. And of course, as you are using more of your spells and shooting abilities and inflicting more and more burning onto enemy units across the army, that can build up, and there is the possibility that you could be doing 2 or 3 mortal damage to almost every enemy unit on the table as you get towards the end of the game, so it really can build up quite quickly and end up doing quite a lot of damage. Finally, there is also a passive which also relates to the burning keyword. It's kind of like the Nurgle disease points in 3rd edition. If an enemy unit has an ability that can heal or return models, they can use that ability to instead remove the burning keyword debuff. So if they just want to get rid of that status effect and not risk the D3 mortals from the burning word flame, they can do that in their turn. So this is a battle trait that isn't a benefit to you in any way, but it does make sense to have it here just so that all of the interactions around that burning keyword are nicely located together and you can access them and read them really, really easily. So I like that they've put it here. It's just not a trait that is going to benefit you. It's a downside to you, but it's nice that it is all together. The battle formation we got shown today, the Word Flame Host, as you can guess, also plays into that Word Flame burning keyword theme, and it does give quite a potent debuff onto enemies that are burning. The rule is called Mutagenic Inferno, and it means that any burning units also subtract 1 from their wound rolls. So not only are they going to be taking chip damage at the end of the turn, but also they are now going to be wounding you a hell of a lot less. And I think this is just a really powerful debuff. -1 to wound is a really good debuff to put on your enemy, and being able to put this on potentially a few units as you get that burning keyword set up on various enemy units across the enemy army, it is going to make it really difficult for your opponent to actually do any noticeable damage to your units. So if you are leaning heavily into any spells or abilities or shooting attacks that do inflict burning and have that word flame keyword, then I think this battle formation is going to be a very, very strong pick for your army. Obviously, being a very caster and ranged heavy faction, we do get to see one of the spells they are bringing as well. The Law of Change is what we see today, and the very appropriate spell from that law is called Transformed to Spawn. This is cast on a 7+. You pick an enemy unit within 12 inches of the caster, and then if you cast the spell, the enemy unit takes D3 mortal damage, which is not bad in and of itself. It's nothing super amazing, but it is a nice little bit of extra chip damage. But then in addition, if any enemy models are slain, you can pick a Chaos Spawn that has either been destroyed or is set up in a new Deep Strike style rule called As a Potential Fate, and it can be deployed straight back onto the board, straight back into combat with that enemy unit. And I mean, this is just really, really powerful. It's great to do that D3 mortal damage anyway, just to kind of do a bit of chip damage and potentially kill a couple of 1 wound infantry. But getting a destroyed unit back as well and back into the game is a really, really nice extra, especially for being cast on a 7+. They do clarify as part of this spell that they've shown off that there is no summoning units from nothing in 4th edition. So like you can at the moment with Blades of Khorne and their Blood Tithe, where you can just summon a whole unit of 20 Bloodletters in, you can't do that anymore in 4th. Now it is all focused around returning units to the board that have been destroyed or having them previously set up in reserve, like this potential fate rule. And what they show to further that is that on the spawn it has a rule called Waves of Mutation, which means it can come back as many times as you like. So while some things will presumably say a returned unit can't itself be later returned, that isn't the case with the spawn. This thing can keep coming back in each of your hero phases as long as it gets destroyed again, of course. So it's a very, very powerful way to keep the pressure on the enemy, being able to respawn a unit, even something just like a spawn, into combat with the enemy with this spell is really strong, and it's going to help move block them. It's going to help just do some extra chip damage in combat. It is just going to be something they are going to have to constantly think about and plan around, knowing that they could see a spawn right into combat with them when they kind of thought they were free from combat. Finally, we also see the usual 4 new war scrolls for the faction, and to kick things off, we start with the big man himself of Kairos Fateweaver. Kairos has kept his 16 wounds, but he has dropped to a 5-up save from his 4-up, and like other big heroes, his movement is now lower, but is the more constant 12 inches rather than degrading. He's never really been a big melee beatstick, and that still rings true. He has the exact same weapon profiles. The only difference is that he gets 1 extra attack on his staff, and the fact that it always wounds on a 2 now for a D3 damage profile rather than the constant 2, so there is a bit more randomness from the Greater Demon of Change. He is still a 3-cast wizard, and he has actually gained a 5-up ward as well now, so that drop to his save is a little bit annoying, but it has been remedied somewhat, which is nice. And then he is still just super reliable and super scary at throwing around magic. Mastery of Magic is a super ability that allows you to change the lowest d6 to match the highest d6 when you are casting. So now, as I said, he is super reliable. He can instantly change a 1 and a 6 to a double 6 if you need to, which is of course really strong. He also keeps Beacon of Sorcery, which just allows you to add 1 to casting and unbinding rolls for friendly Disciples wizards within 12. This has actually dropped from the current range of 18 inches, but it's still really strong, and again, gives you so much more reliability to all of your casters, not just Kairos. He has lost his Infernal Gateway War Scroll spell, but instead it gains a new one in Arcane Suggestion. This one does have a hefty cast value of 8, although Fate Weaver can usually hit that relatively reliably. He's got that +1 and also Master of Magic, not to mention any use of Destiny dice you may want to use, but this lets you pick an enemy within 18 inches, and then if it goes off, you can pick 1 effect to go onto them. They either can't use any commands until your next turn, or they have to subtract 1 from saving throws, or they have to subtract 1 from hit and wound rolls. Now, this can obviously be incredibly powerful, giving a scary Death Star -1 to hit and -1 to wound is quite frankly terrifying for them, but equally making a really tanky unit that bit squishier with -1 to their saves could mean you could kill them off with some units charging in, so it is just overall a very strong, very versatile spell for Kairos to have, and I think if you are bringing him, you will be using it a hell of a lot. Finally for Kairos, he also has Oracle of Eternity. This no longer lets you add more Destiny dice to your pool, instead it really lets you play into the mission a lot more. You can, once per battle, either read the past, and this lets you pick a battle tactic you've already attempted and try it again, or you can read the future, and you can pick 2 battle tactics for that turn. So this is going to give you a much better chance of completing at least one of them. It does only still count for 1 even if you do both, but it means that you can much more reliably hedge your bets if you needed to make, for instance, 3 charge rolls and you just failed 1 by rolling a double 1 or whatever. You still have that backup tactic that you chose and hope that you can get that one so you still get your battle tactic for the turn. So from a sheer point scoring perspective, it's a super strong ability to have. It makes Kairos maybe not the most killy character ever, but he is very good at buffing, extremely good at debuffing, and he is just a very strong utility piece for your army. The Gaunt Summoner is up next, and he keeps his same 5 wounds and 6 up save. He is still a 2-cast wizard, and like Kairos, he gains a ward, albeit just a 6 up one for him. He only hits on 4s with the Change Staff now, but it has bumped to D3 damage instead of 1, and then his blade has lost a pip of rend, but it gains some consistency with 2 damage rather than D3. The big changes for him are the Minions of the Silver Tower and the Book of Profane Secrets. The book no longer gives him +1 to his casting and unbinding, instead it lets a unit deep strike. In your movement phase, you pick a friendly unit which is going to be in a Silver Tower. This is a version of the Tzeentch deep strike rules and is done in your deployment phase, and they can deploy wholly within 12 inches of the summoner and 9 inches away from the enemy. So this is quite simple, sort of deep strike onto the board, movement shenanigans style rule. But then he gets to buff that with his new spell, Divert Realm Gate. So he loses his Infernal Flames War Scroll spell, but this new one is a casting value of 7, and if it goes off, this allows a unit set up via the Book of Profane Secrets to be deployed wholly within 18 inches of the summoner, but then more importantly, 7 inches from the enemy. So this can set you up for a much easier charge out of Deep Strike if you wanted. You can, set a unit up 7 inches away within 18 inches of the summoner as well. So it gives you quite a bit of area to play around, and then charge into an enemy unit to tie them up or kill them off without giving them really much of a chance to react to you. One of the old classic but now updated models of the Curseling is also shown off. This guy is the result of a deal gone wrong with Tzeentch, and he actually gains 1 health, bumping him up to 6, and then he still has his 3 up save, which makes him somewhat survivable for a foot hero. He still has the very random and swingy ranged weapon with D6 shots from the hurled arcane energy, They hit and wound on 3s for 1 damage, so they're nothing amazing, but it does have the word flame rule, so he can use this to throw some of that sweet burning debuff onto the enemies that we saw above. In melee, his sword and staff are now combined into one profile as well, which is 5 attacks that hit and wound on 4s with -1 rend and 2 damage. So he's not exactly great in melee, but again, he is a 2-cast wizard, so throwing spells around and interacting with the magic phase is where his real focus is. In terms of his War Scroll abilities, he does lose Gleaner Magic and also his Vessel of Chaos rule, but in return he gains a spell, Infusion Arcanum. This is cast on a fairly low value of 5, and it gives +1 rend and damage to his melee profile, so now he's actually not terrible. He's still not great, but with this buff, he can do just over 3 damage to an enemy unit with a 4-up save. So yeah, it's nothing amazing. You're not really wanting this guy in combat, but he can do a little bit better. I would say the main focus of this character, if you want to bring him, is his Disruptor of the Arcane rule. This allows you to roll a dice whenever he unbinds a spell, and on a 4+, you subtract 1 from the power level of the enemy wizard that tried to cast it. So now he can potentially unbind a spell from an enemy 2-cast wizard, but then if you roll that 4+, you can stop them from doing their second cast as well. So he can potentially completely negate an enemy 2-cast wizard all by himself without even using his second unbind, which is really quite powerful. And it's also potentially quite hilarious if you manage to drop Nagash's power level by 1. It's only till the end of the turn, but it could still mean that Nagash gets 1 less spell off, which sometimes in undead armies, you are really relying on Nagash getting all of those spells off to really bring the buffs and heals and all the other stuff that Nagash can do. So even just dropping it by 1 could make a big difference to your opponent's game plans. Finally, we get to see the little demonic gremlins themselves, the Pink Horrors. This is now a separate war scroll from the combined Horrors of Tzeentch that they are in 3rd. The Pink Horrors are 2 wounds with a 6-up save, and they also gain 1 inch of movement, going up to 6 inches. They still have their ranged weapon in Arcane Flames, which are 2 shots that hit and wound on 4s with no rend, so nothing scary, but once again they do have that weird flame rule, so they are again a great way of spreading some burning onto your opponent. Their main trick is the Lunatic Demise ability, and this is the new splitting mechanic for them. It means that when a model in this unit is killed, you can choose to do 2 things. You can either pick a friendly Blue and Brimstone Horrors unit within 12 and return 2 slain Blue Horrors to it, or you can pick an enemy unit in combat with the Pink Horrors, and on a 4+ you do a mortal damage to them. So this is just another reasonably reliable way to bring back some dead models if you do have that nearby unit of Blue Horrors that's taken a few hits, or if you don't, or you don't want to bring any back, you just want to do some chip damage to the enemy instead, the Petty Vengeance will allow you to chuck a few mortal damage onto the enemy unit that may have killed off your Pink Horrors. And they can both be fairly useful depending on whether you want to keep that unit of Blue Horrors alive a bit longer, or, you know, just kind of try and kill off the enemy unit that killed you. So they are both quite useful, and I think the fact that you do get to choose does make it quite an attractive little ability to have. Overall, I think they still seem to be somewhat useful. Chucking that word flame around will be their main use, but with that extra wound and now also sporting a base 6-up ward, they can get up near the enemy and make a bit of a nuisance of themselves, they can hold objectives that little bit better, and they can just generally be a pain before bringing back even more Blue Horrors to further annoy your opponent. So that is the Disciples of Tzeentch. As always, I'd love to know what you make of these rules and what you are also hoping to see from the rest of the war scrolls and battle formations for the army. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.